Good evening, I'm Leila Masimova and you're watching A News. Now, the major stories making headlines today. US President Donald Trump considers pausing his auto tariffs, plans to impose tax hikes on foreign-made semiconductors and pharmaceuticals. New Russian strikes hit Ukraine's Sumy. The city mourns the victims of the previous deadly attack. Baku Initiative Group addresses UN Forum on People of African Descent in New York. There is more US trade tariffs on the way. President Donald Trump is pressing forward with plans to impose tax hikes on foreign-made semiconductors and pharmaceuticals. Washington says it's a part of a broader strategy to reshape American trade priorities.
Semiconductors and pharmaceuticals are the next products to have increased US tariffs imposed on them. President Donald Trump says it's part of a broader economic strategy to reshape US trade priorities. The increases are designed to stimulate domestic manufacturing.
We don't make our own drugs, our own pharmaceuticals. We don't make our own drugs anymore. The drug companies are in Ireland and they're in lots of other places, China. And all I have to do is impose a tariff. The more, the faster they move in. The higher the tariff, it's very simple. It's inversely proportional. The higher the tariff, the faster they come.
Do you have a percentage in mind and a timeline?
I have a timeline, yeah, not too distant future. We're doing it because we want to make our own drugs.
Earlier in week, US Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick said that smartphones, computers, and some other electronics will come under separate tariffs, saying all these sectors are critical to American security. And now the list includes pharmaceuticals and semiconductors.
So all those products are going to come under semiconductors, and they're going to have a special focused type of tariff to make sure that those products get reshored. We need to have semiconductors, we need to have chips, and we need to have flat panels. We need to have these things made in America. We can't be reliant on Southeast Asia for all of the things that operate for us. So what he's doing is he's saying they're exempt from the reciprocal tariffs, but they're included in the semiconductor tariffs, which are coming in probably a month or two. So these are coming soon.
Meanwhile, Trump says he's contemplating a temporary pause on tariffs affecting the auto industry, which was a 25% duty introduced earlier this year. Trump's decision signals a more cautious stance as the administration strives to balance and reinforce key sectors while mitigating negative impacts on the auto industry. The US is now preparing to impose these new trade restrictions on high-tech and health sectors, while the auto sector awaits further clarity on the future of its tariffs.
South Korea is stepping up support for its semiconductor industry with a $23 billion package. Seoul is citing growing pressure from the Chinese competition and uncertainty over possible US tariffs on important chips.
South Korea announced a major boost to its semiconductor industry support, raising the total package to more than $23 billion. The move comes amid rising competition from China and growing concern over US trade policy, including potential tariffs on imported chips. While some stocks, such as those tied to exempted products, saw a temporary lift, overall investor sentiment remains cautious. Taiwan is already simulating the possible impact on its chip makers, including TSMC, while Malaysia is assessing how additional levies might disrupt its $16 billion chip export sector. Meanwhile, Advanced Micro Devices, better known as AMD, says it's ready to begin chip production at a new facility in Arizona. The organization is a leading US company that designs the processors powering everything from laptops and gaming consoles to data centers. But like many US firms, it relies heavily on chip manufacturing in Taiwan. The company says it's working closely with partners to manage any supply chain risks. Semiconductors, often called the brains of modern electronics, are essential to nearly every modern device, from smartphones and laptops to cars, medical equipment and power systems. They are produced through a complex global supply chain. The US designs many of them, but much of the manufacturing happens overseas, especially in Asia. Trump's proposed tariffs are meant to encourage domestic production, but critics warn they could raise costs, delay deliveries and strain international trade.
Great to have you with us, Ambassador Gustavo Aristegui. Thank you for joining us a conversation. I believe we're facing some technical issues right now, so we're going to come back to the ambassador. US President Donald Trump says he believes Iran is intentionally delaying a nuclear deal with the United States. He says Tehran must abandon any drive for a nuclear weapon or face a possible military strike on atomic facilities. However, the White House has described the talks as positive and constructive. The next meeting is scheduled for Saturday in Rome. Sources familiar with the discussions say the round will aim to establish a general framework for a possible agreement. The last direct negotiations between the two countries took place during former President Obama's term. Trump later withdrew the U.S. from the 2015 nuclear deal.
I changed my mind, but I'm flexible. And you I want them to be a rich, great nation. The only thing is, one thing, simple. It's really simple. They can't have a nuclear weapon. And they got to go fast because they're fairly close to having one. And they're not going to have one. And if we have to do something very harsh, we'll do it. And I'm not doing it for us, I'm doing it for the world.
The EU sanctions on Russia are up for renewal in July, but there is concern in Brussels that Hungary could try to veto the package of restrictions again, and the EU officials are looking for ways to get around a possible veto. Pablo Guterres reports more.
Every 6 months since the war in Ukraine began, the EU votes on whether to maintain its sanctions on Russia. In July, the latest deadline arrives, and once again, Hungary has signaled it may say no. The Hungarian government has been critical of the sanctions on Moscow since they were first imposed. Budapest threatened to withhold approval during the last two renewals, but then agreed to vote in favor after obtaining concessions from the EU. But for this 17th round of sanctions, Brussels is worried it won't be so easy this time. Sanctions come in two parts: bans on Russian goods like gas and steel, and a list of more than 2,500 Russians banned from the European Union. All 27 countries need to agree to extend both. Legal experts here in Brussels say there is a possible way to get the sanctions in place, even if Hungary vetoes them. EU officials say there is a loophole that may allow the current package of sanctions to remain in place without the need to get them approved by all EU member states. Another option is to offer Hungary a deal, for example, agreeing not to impose new sanctions, rather only propose an extension of the current restrictions on Russia, or even replace the current sanctions with higher tariffs on Russian products. There is also the controversial option of stripping Hungary of its voting rights in the European Council if it refuses to support the EU's pressure campaign on Moscow. All of this comes as the EU continues and hopes to bring the Ukraine into the EU, give it EU membership. Another move Hungary might block. Pablo Gutierrez for A News in Brussels.
We're coming back to Ambassador Gustavo Aristegui. Great to have you with us.
Thank you very much.
Ambassador, in your view, how might a potential US-China trade war over semiconductors reshape global supply chains, particularly for key players like South Korea and Malaysia, which are deeply integrated into the chip manufacturing ecosystem?
Well, actually, it's semiconductors and rare earths. You'll see that there's been a complete embargo of rare earths against the West, not only the United States, but also the European Union, which means that some of the most important high technology sectors are going to be affected. But let's face it, these semiconductors are produced in countries that are normally rivals or adversaries of China. China has a very poor technology in this field. It is not their specialty. They are several generations behind the West or Taiwan in semiconductors and microchips. So this is actually one of the reasons why their fighter jets are one notch below the American jets like the F-22 or the F-35. That their fighting radars or their long-range radars aren't capable of doing the same things that the Western radars do. But finally, what really is important to point out is that we need China to accept that, yes, it is a very important economy, yes, it is a very important country, demographically, militarily, geostrategically, but it needs to stop being as aggressive and as assertive, as expansionist as it has been in the past. You know, not everybody can be wrong. When countries like South Korea, when countries like Japan, or Thailand, Vietnam, Philippines, Singapore feel threatened by China, it's because there is a serious issue. And this is something that is not just going to go away. We see that China is trying to occupy key sectors in the world, be it mining rights for critical raw materials, lithium, cobalt, copper, and so many others, besides the rare earths markets that they already dominate by a percentage of 80%, just imagine. But last but not least, there's also they are trying to access and secure new sources of fossil fuels, gas and oil, of course, with very advantageous deals and contracts with some of the more, let's call them gray suppliers of the world, and even countries that are subject to international sanctions, as is the case of Russia, Iran, or Venezuela. Finally, the only way to stop this trade war is that China understands that it cannot impose its will against everybody else. And especially one thing that we must never forget. The yuan has been artificially devaluated for decades, allowing the Chinese goods to arrive in an artificially low price to places. And we also saw that, let's call it the loyalty of the Chinese manufacturers during the pandemic wasn't really exemplary. They broke the supply chains then, and this is why many countries in the world, not only the United States, started thinking seriously about reshoring the production lines back into their countries.
Thank you. We look forward to your insights, Ambassador. Russia has launched a fresh wave of strikes on the northeastern Ukrainian city of Sumy late Monday. Just a day after a missile attack killed 35 people and injured more than 100. According to Ukrainian officials, Russia's defense ministry claims responsibility for Sunday's assault.
Lying in a hospital bed in Sumy lies 13-year-old Kyrylo Ilyashenko, who is hailed as a hero by Ukraine's interior minister. It's after he saved lives during one of the deadliest missile strikes in recent months that killed 35 people and injured more than 100, according to officials. Kyrylo and his mother told Ihor Klimenko they were on a crowded bus Sunday morning, heading to sports training, when a Russian ballistic missile struck near their vehicle. The explosion turned their ride into a scene of chaos and bloodshed.
It all happened so fast. The glass shattered into my face. I was covered in blood. I shouted, "Kiryusha, where are you?" We touched each other, but we couldn't see.
His mother says he forced open a damaged bus door with her help and began pulling survivors from the wreckage.
I first tried to open the door by myself, and then my mother helped me to open the door.
How many people were on the bus?
It was full. There were a lot of people.
Around 40.
Yes.
Moments after that missile struck, paramedic Artem Selyanin grabbed his medical kit and rushed to help the wounded. But on Monday, he was caught on the staircase of the residential building where he lives with his family during the second strike on Monday.
I was running from one wounded person to another. It was emotionally exhausting. And doing triage, deciding who needs help first, I was lost. I had to come back because I ran out of tourniquets. I ran out of thermal blankets. We used them to cover the dead. There were many dead and we had nothing else to use. I used every blanket in my backpack and medical kit.
The Ukrainian Air Force reported that a new wave of missiles and guided bombs hit Sumy within minutes of each other. Local authorities said there were no immediate reports of casualties. Russia's defense ministry claimed responsibility, and Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov alleged that Ukrainian officials were meeting Western counterparts in the town, though no evidence was provided. The US and European leaders swiftly condemned Sunday's attack. Ukrainian officials says the renewed attacks prove Russia is not serious about peace. The United Nations estimates that more than 12,000 civilians have been killed since Russia's full-scale invasion began in 2022. The latest assault on Sumy has once again drawn global attention to the human toll of a war now entering its fourth year.
Justice Minister of France, Gérald Darmanin, has confirmed overnight attacks on several prisons across the country, including one in southern city of Toulon. Minister said prison staff were targeted with arson and automatic gunfire and what appeared to be intimidation attempts linked to drug trafficking. Darmanin announced he is heading to Toulon to support affected officers, vowing strong action against criminal networks. Interim Minister Bruno Letellier also condemned the attacks, calling for a firm state response. Algeria has expelled 12 French diplomats from the country, citing a breach of diplomatic norms by French authorities. It's after France arrested an Algerian consul official in Paris last week, as well as two other Algerian nationals. They're accused of allegedly kidnapping a social media influencer and critic of the Algerian government, Amir Bakouz. He was granted asylum by France in 2023. However, Algeria has long criticized Paris for refusing to extradite him. Now reporting live from the United Nations headquarters in New York, where the international conference Decolonization Silent Revolution is currently underway. Organized the Baku Initiative Group, the event has brought together diplomats, scholars, activists and indigenous leaders to address the lingering legacies of colonialism and discuss pathways to sovereignty and justice for still affected regions. Our OB Shabandar reports from the venue. Hi OB, what are the main objectives of today's conference on the decolonization? And who are the key participants of the conference?
Well, we're here at the United Nations headquarters in New York City, where an important international conference is taking place with the title of Decolonization Silent Revolution. And it will include activists and experts from around the world, from the South Pacific to Latin America, where they will address the pressing issue of how indigenous people are facing oppression mainly in French-controlled territories as they attempt to gain self-rule and sovereignty. So they will be meeting with representatives and activists from countries like Mali, like New Caledonia, and Saint Martinique, from former French colonial countries that faced French colonialism in some instances for decades, where they will exchange ideas on how they can break the shackles of colonialism, particularly for New Caledonia. This is a pressing issue because this is a French colonial territory in the South Pacific, where the indigenous people of that island have been struggling for freedom for years, a struggle that has often been met with military strikes by French colonial forces that has resulted in the injury of many of those activists that have been trying to raise their voice and for the international community to hear their struggle. So this meeting is taking place today, hosted by the Baku Initiative Group, an international NGO that was set up to bring the voices of activists like the ones from New Caledonia as they continue the struggle for freedom from French colonial rule. So it'll be very interesting to see how those activists and experts interact with the Baku Initiatives Group and by also representatives from a country like Mali, a country that just recently forced their former colonial rulers, France, and forced the French military out of their country. So a very important international meeting taking place today here in New York at the United Nations Decolonization Silent Revolution, as the people of New Caledonia strive to have their voices heard by the world. Back to you.
Thank you, Obey. We'll keep informing you about the conference. At the fourth session of the United Nations Permanent Forum on People of African Descent in New York, the executive director of the Baku Initiative Group, Abbas Abbasov, said many African people are not getting their basic universal rights realized. The week-long session highlights global calls for reparations for historical legacies of enslavement and colonialism. And Abbasov said the Baku Initiative Group is constantly supporting nations fighting colonial and near-colonial oppression. He said they are committed to providing tangible support.
The right of life, liberty, equality, cultural identity and decolonization, these are not privileges. They are universal human rights enshrined in the United Nations Charter, the Bandung Principles of the Non-Alignment Movement, and in many other international documents. Yet for many African nations and people of African descent around the world, these rights remain aspirational rather than realized. For the last 2 years, our organization has been the organizer of around 30 international conferences. The above-mentioned negative impact of the legacies of colonialism is a main topic of our events, which bring together representatives and leaders of independence movements, decolonization experts, and researchers from Guadeloupe, Martinique, Bonaire, Saint Martin, Kanaki, Maui Nui, French Guiana, Réunion, Mayotte, Corsica, and others still suffering from the colonial policy.
Azerbaijan Foreign Minister has sharply criticized recent comments by French Foreign Minister Jean-Noël Barrot about the Azerbaijan and Armenia peace process. Barrot had mentioned that the tensions had increased at the border between the two nations. However, Foreign Ministry spokesperson Aykan Hajizadeh said their remarks show double standards. He accuses France of supplying arms to Armenia. Hajizadeh also rejected French criticism of illegal proceedings for the peace process, calling it interference in domestic affairs. He further accused France of pursuing a neo-colonial agenda that undermines international stability. There has been another attempt to smuggle drugs from Iran into Azerbaijan using a drone. It happened on the 6th of April, according to the State Border Service Agency. The Hordes Frontier Unit and officers from the Ministry of Internal Affairs intercepted the unmanned aircraft. It was carrying 14 kilograms of marijuana and 40 grams of methamphetamine. There was another attempt on the 8th of April when officers recovered 4.5 kilograms of marijuana and made 2 arrests. Armenia says it is ready to sign a peace agreement with Azerbaijan and supports the simultaneous dissolution of the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe Minsk Group. It's according to Armenian Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan, who made a speech at the parliamentary session on Tuesday. He says that if the Karabakh conflict is considered resolved, the group's format is no longer necessary. He also dismissed Azerbaijan's demand to amend Armenia's constitution, referencing a constitutional court ruling that found no territorial claims against Azerbaijan in the current text. Pashinyan said that both nations deserve peace, not continued conflict. Deepening economic ties and facilitating trade, that were the main aim of the International Conference of Leading Think Tanks of the Organization of Turkic States in Uzbekistan on Monday. The event in Tashkent was part of a broader push for regional economic integration.
Tashkent, the capital of Uzbekistan, became the center of strategic dialogue on Monday. Leading scholars, economists and policymakers from the Organization of Turkic States convened for a high-level conference themed Expanding Trade Potential among the countries of the OTS, Joint Research and Strategic Solutions. The event, organized by Uzbekistan's Center for Economic Research and Reforms in collaboration with the Organization of the Turkic State Secretariat, stems from an initiative proposed by President Shavkat Mirziyoyev during the 11th OTS summit in Bishkek last November. The primary goal of the conference is to enhance trade and economic cooperation among OTS countries through targeted research and actionable strategies. Discussions centered on key issues such as removing trade barriers, streamlining customs procedures, and developing digital trade platforms. The OTS Deputy Secretary General Merey Mukasyan highlighted the bloc's substantial collective market of 175 million people and its growing global influence. He said that major steps have already been taken to foster economic unity, including the establishment of the Union of Turkish Chambers of Commerce and Industry and the Turkish Investment Fund. He also unveiled plans for a new Turan Special Economic Zone to be created in Kazakhstan's Turkestan region, seen as a key part of the strategic Middle Corridor. It could transform the region into a vital transport and logistics hub. Throughout the day, participants delved into a range of pressing topics, from untapped trade opportunities and digital innovation to sustainable development, regional infrastructure, and the green economy. Experts also addressed pressing socio-demographic challenges facing the Turkic world.
That's all for now. Thanks for spending your time with A News. Right after the bulletin, you'll be watching a story about A News documentary from DR Congo. After that, our Orkan Mashov to interview the author of the film, Cecilia Lavernas, that will share her experience.